Hey guys, Chris here and I'm back with another skateboard video, and what I wanted to do with this one is look at the brand new Exway X1 Pro against the previous version, which was the Exway X1. So when you look at these two boards on paper, there doesn't appear to be that much of a difference. Of course, there's a lot of new features that have been packed into this board, but how does that actually apply when you are comparing them to each other in terms of the range, the speed, the general performance, the ride? That's exactly what I wanted to get into in this video. So if you're considering picking up the Exway X1 Pro, or maybe you're thinking about saving yourself some money and picking up the previous generation board, we're going to be breaking down the differences between them to hopefully make that decision easier, but most importantly to highlight if this is still one of the best boards that you can pick up for less than £1,000. So let's get into it. So very similar to my previous video, I'm going to be splitting this into categories, and those are in essentially the order of what I think is important, but based on my own opinion. That's going to be speed, range, performance, ride, the build, the look, and also features. Speed. Now the first one on that list is going to be the speed. Now, of course, if you ride electric skateboards, you know that the speed for some of us is one of the most important things that the board is able to do. So Exway advertised this board as being able to do 29 miles an hour. Now that's with the turbo mode activated. Now that's something that you use on the phone app. You go into the settings and you're able to tweak various things, including turning turbo mode on and off. But whether it's a firmware update or whether it's the fact that these boards are still fairly new, I've only been able to get 50% of turbo mode being activated on my board. So essentially what that means is when I turn on turbo mode using the Exway app on my phone, there's a little bit of text at the bottom of the turbo mode button that lets me know that only 50% of this mode is active. But as it stands now in terms of how close I am to being able to get 29 miles an hour out of the board, I'm hovering between 26 and 27. I actually had a race against a friend of mine called Rob who has a GTX from Evolve. Now, the price difference between those two boards is pretty massive, and also the general look and performance of those boards as well. The GTX, they're known for being very, very fast boards. They have a top speed of around 26 miles an hour. On this particular race, off the line, the GTX was much quicker, but as it hit its top speed, the Exway X1 Pro caught up and eventually overtook the board. So this board is sitting at around 26 to 27 miles an hour. It really depends on what road surfaces that I'm on. Of course, your build, the terrain that you ride on, weather conditions, all of those things are going to affect the speed of the board. But I've personally been able to get 26 to 27 miles an hour out of it. It would be great to have the other 50% of turbo mode unlocked to see if I can really achieve the speed of 29 miles an hour. But looking back at Exway's previous board, the speed that they declared at that point was 25 miles an hour, and that board was definitely able to hit that. But of course, you need to keep in mind that the terrain that you ride on, your build, how heavy you are, the weather conditions, the area that you're riding on in terms of if there's a lot of hills, all of these things will affect the top speed of the board, but never had an issue being able to hit the speed that Exway claim. So with this, no complaints about the speed. It's been a lot of fun to ride, and it is a quick board. Range. Now from there, it's going to be one that's really important, and that's the range. So the Exway X1 Pro has a suggested range of 16 miles. Now, if you remember the previous video where we looked at the Exway X1, that was 10 miles, and we were not able to get anywhere near 10 miles out of the board. I will mention that in terms of my weight, I'm about 74 to 75 kilograms, and when I ride electric skateboards, I put them in the fastest mode that they can possibly go in, and I never shift from that mode. Even if I'm riding somewhere slowly, I'm always going to be in the top mode because I like to be able to accelerate as quick as I can in the skateboard. And with this board having a suggested range of 16 miles, I was really apprehensive to see what we could do with that. So with the previous board, we were getting around 5 to 6 miles in terms of range. That's riding on mode 4, which is the quickest mode setting that the Exway X1 has. Now that's riding, quite fast, but not really flooring it every single opportunity that we get. If we were really going for it, trying to max out the board speed in every opportunity we could possibly find, we were getting sort of between 4 to 5 miles of range. So a suggested range of 10 miles with the original Exway really wasn't feasible, but as I said in my previous video, 4 to 5 miles, fully obliterating the board, max speed everywhere you're going, that works for me. That's more than enough for me to get from point A to point B, but if you're cruising, you'd probably want to have a little bit more range. Now, when we look at the Exway X1 Pro with a suggested range of 16 miles, going to be apprehensive because we saw what happened with the previous one, so what did we get out of this? After doing a full-on range test with this board, under the same circumstances where I'm going to be flooring it and full throttling this board every single opportunity that I get, I was able to get exactly 9.9 miles before the board would not even accelerate. I literally rode the board to complete failure, and something I will mention is that the board stopped at about 2 or 3% of the board's battery. But what that meant is that although it wouldn't accelerate at all, even completely on a flat surface, even slightly going down a decline, there was no power in the board at all, but I could still brake, which means that the regen braking was helping me out a little bit by saving a bit of battery and helping to charge up the battery a little bit. But most importantly, it meant that I could brake, because I was riding with my friend Rob, who's on a GTX, who was able to tow me, but it meant if I needed to brake, I still had the ability to stop the board, which is definitely going to be a bonus in the safety department. But in terms of the 16 mile an hour range, again, not feasible, but 9.9 miles in mode 4, riding the board as fast as you can, every opportunity that you get to full throttle the board. It's a massive upgrade from the previous board. Being able to go from 4 to 6 miles, absolutely obliterating the board, or 5 to 6 miles, riding quite casually. I think 9.9 miles is a big improvement. And anyone that had the original Exway is really going to notice the difference there, and it's going to go a long way. Although 9.9 miles doesn't touch what the Evolves can do, or some of the other boards that can really do heavy miles, I think that's plenty for most riders. In terms of myself, I was very, very happily surprised. So big props to Exway for being able to increase the power and the range of this board. That leads us really nicely onto the performance. If you remember the previous video that I filmed, I'll also link it above and down below in the video description. One of the things that I noticed with the Exway, the original one, was that as you were riding it, you dropped below 90%, you noticed a little bit of a decline in the board's performance and its ability to hit the top speed. As that battery continued to go down, hit the 60% mark, the 50% mark, you felt the board becoming more and more sluggish, and it was harder and harder to be able to get the board going, to be able to get that power and that torquiness that you would feel if the board was at 90 or 100% battery. Now, when we look at the Exway X1 Pro, this is definitely an area that you feel an improvement. Battery hit 90%, I didn't really notice a difference in the way that the board was performing. All the way down to 50%, 40%, even 20%, the board still felt like it was incredibly torquey. It still felt like I could hit that top speed, which was something that I didn't have in the original Exway boards. As the battery declined, you really felt the board become sluggish, but with the new Exway X1 Pro, even with the battery going down to 20%, the board was still able to pretty much hit the top speed. Of course, you are going to have a slight decline in the board's performance, but it was nowhere near as massive as the original Exway board. So again, big props to Exway for being able to correct that issue. It's clear that the new battery that they've put in the Exway X1 Pro has a lot of benefits, and it is something that you as a rider and myself will be able to feel, and it's something that I personally have felt and noticed immediately after riding this board. Ride. So moving on to the ride of this board. Now, the construction of it, which of course is going to affect the ride, is pretty much identical to the original Exway. It's hub motors, everything inside the board is all internal, you don't see any wires, everything is inside the deck, the battery's inside there, it's very sleek. I do like the way that the board looks, but of course it being a hub motor board with a very stiff deck means that it's going to have a few drawbacks. Now, if you're a rider that's used to riding boards with stiff decks, then this isn't really something that you may notice. But me being a default boosted rider, it's always the board that I default to because of the flexi deck. Moving on to a board like this, you do notice a difference. Of course, the fact that it's a hub motor board as well means that the rear wheels are thin. You do get bigger wheels on this board, 85 millimeter wheels as opposed to 80 on the previous board. So that does help a little bit. Of course, it helps you in the speed department as well. But hub motor board, thin rear wheels, and a stiff deck mean that it's still going to have those twitchy properties that I referred to in the original Exway video. If you're riding the board over bumps, and there's this one particular bump on the road that I ride my board on when I'm going to and from work, it's essentially a nice smooth bit of tarmac where there's a couple of large trees on the side of the road and the roots are actually kind of popping through the ground a little bit. Now what that means is that it's quite a sharp bump, it's quite a sudden bump, and if I go over this bump on the boosted board, it's not something that I'm worried about or that I feel. But going over that bump in the Exway X1 Pro at a similar speed was definitely something I wasn't expecting. Being so used to a flexi deck means that you do kind of need to get used to the twitchy nature of a board with a stiff deck. If you're going over immediate bumps like that, or even the white lines or yellow lines, depending on where you live, in the middle of the road, I do feel the deck kind of twitching around, and it's something that I don't feel in a board that has a much more flexible deck. But this isn't something that can be helped because I said before, hub motor board, kind of like you could refer to it as a unibody construction in terms of the actual deck, with all of the components of the board inside the deck. It's really nice, it's really slick looking, it's clean, and it also doesn't draw too much attention because of how clean the construction is, but it has some drawbacks. But Exway have definitely done things to try and help this by increasing the size of the tires, which definitely gives you a little bit more stability while you're riding, and of course increasing the thickness of the shock absorption grip tape that these boards come with. Essentially, the only way I could describe it is, unlike having traditional grip tape where it's just very thin, very tactile, very grippy, it has a foam layer underneath the grip tape between the top of the board and the grip tape. So it does have a bit of a spongy feel to it, which does help a little bit with the vibrations, but it's still something you do notice. I will say that this does definitely feel a little bit more comfortable than the previous Exway board to ride over rough surfaces, but that stiff deck with the hub motor wheels is still going to make for a slightly bumpy ride when you're going over rough surfaces when you compare it to a board with much thicker back tires or rear wheels and that flexible deck. But like I said, if you're used to riding boards with stiff decks, this isn't something that you're going to notice. If you're used to riding hub motor boards again, it might not be something that you notice very much, but it was definitely something I picked up on. Saying that though, something I did notice on this board, it's not something that I ever experienced on the previous Exway, but these wheels seem to be getting chewed through way faster than the previous Exway. I've never had chips like this appear in the board when we've been riding on the exact same surfaces that we do with all of the skateboards that we make videos of. It's the same route that I take when I'm going to and from work. I have no idea how this happened. I've not crashed into anything. I've not gone over anything that was particularly rough. So it's really strange to see such a big chunk missing out of the wheel. The board is still riding completely fine. Of course, carving on it when you're missing such a large section of wheel is probably something that I wouldn't want to do. I've got to be honest and say it's not something I even noticed until we stopped and I plugged the board into charge. But it is really strange for these wheels to be wearing away so quickly when, in terms of how many miles I've done in this board, is approaching 48 miles. So it's a bit strange, but if anyone else has experienced anything like this in these new Exway X1 Pros, please let me know in the comments section. I'm hoping this doesn't mean that these wheels are going to be breaking down much quicker than the previous Exway, but I definitely wanted to mention that because considering I've not even put 100 miles on this board, it's surprising to see something like this happening so soon. Features. From there, it's going to be features. Now, with the Exway X1 Pro, a lot of people are talking about that riot system that Exway have created, which allows you to remove the hub motors and install belt-driven motors instead. Now, of course, that is an awesome feature to have, to essentially have turned the Exway X1 Pro into a modular board, which makes it quick and easy to be able to switch between hub and belt. I think that's awesome. It's unfortunately not something that we're able to touch on in this video, because at the time of us receiving this board, the riot system was still going through the prototype stages. It wasn't quite ready for us to be able to create a video of, but as soon as it is available for us to be able to get our hands on, I will be doing up a follow-up going into more detail about the performance benefits of that, the way it compares to the hub motor system, and giving you guys more feedback on that. But aside from that, the board still has all of the same features the previous Exway had, which is that MagSafe style charger, which is magnetically attracted to the port that you use to charge the board up. Makes it nice and easy. The flap also retracts by itself, which is also a really nice touch. And this board does have a fast charger versus a regular charger. In terms of the time difference, it's about 2 hours, 20 minutes using the regular charger and about an hour to be able to charge the board up using the fast charger. And that's from a completely flat battery, which is definitely a bonus. In terms of other features, this board is also a little bit more water resistant or essentially weatherproof than the previous board as well. It's still IP55, but they've made a couple of changes to help seal up the board a little bit better. So if you're riding through dusty areas or you do happen to get caught out in the rain and you have to ride home while it's raining, this board will handle those conditions a little bit better than the previous generation. In terms of the look and build of this board, of course, we mentioned that the construction is pretty much the same as the previous board. Of course, they have made this one a little bit more stealth. I'm a big fan of the black wheels, the black grip tape, the little Exway logo on the top of the board. It really does look nice. But in terms of its general build and the way it looks, it is a very simple looking skateboard, which is really nice. It tends not to draw too much attention if you're going through trains or using other means of public transport, which is always good if you're in a bit of a sketchy area. This board doesn't scream out like some of the other electric skateboards that it's very expensive, which is always appreciated. But aside from that, I've got to say that it is a low-key look that I am a fan of. Really simple, straightforward, very similar looking to the original board. No real complaints. So hopefully in this video I've been able to answer some of the questions that you had about this board. If there's anything that I've missed out, please ask any questions down below and I'll be happy to answer them to the best of my knowledge. In terms of what's next, I'm going to be doing an Exway X1 Pro versus the Boosted Stealth, and also Exway X1 Pro versus the Evolve GTX. Please let us know if there's anything else that you want us to see or any boards you want us to try and make videos of. But this has been fun to do. Of course, there's going to be a review coming out on this once I've been able to put a few more miles on the board and really test it out and see what this thing can do. But hopefully you've enjoyed watching this video. thumbs up if you have, and please consider subscribing so you can stay up to date with all of the videos that I post. And I will catch you in the next one, guys. Take care.